Okay, so for me also a very, very warm welcome to this convention, to the 2022 edition of the Main and European Convention. Can everyone hear me in the back? Is that all right? Lovely. Okay, that's part of no. Not very good. Okay, I'll try to. You just raise a hand if you can't hear me. Okay, lovely. This is part of how we're trying to set out the room so that my voice doesn't have to travel so much. Okay. So I'm actually quite excited to be here because yesterday was the first time I've been to Schleswig. So I wasn't here the last time for the Order Convention, and Singarava Prasadacharyan and I we agreed to organize this convention. Just as part of us really wanting to share our inspiration and us having been ordained quite recently, wanting to give back as well, wanting to give back to the Order, especially in our situations. Yeah, hello. Okay, so we chose this title. So the title of the convention is An Explosion of the Heart. Yeah, Bodhicitta, An Explosion of the Heart. And this is partly from Sangharakshita's lecture, The Rising of the Bodhicitta from the Bodhisattva Ideal, as well as the lecture on the rising of the Bodhicitta from the meaning of conversion in Buddhism. So those two lectures have given the foundation for the theme for this exploration. And I was trying to think, okay, what to say. First of all, to Order members who hopefully have read more Bhante than I have about bodhicitta, right? I noticed that bodhicitta is one of those terms which gets used a lot, but in so many kind of different contexts, right? In so many different shades of meanings. Even the Buddhist tradition uses it in very, very different ways. So I've been trying to dig deep into, okay, well, what are we actually talking about here? Is it just altruism? Is it just the kind of another way of talking about going for refuge like the Mahayana did, the early Mahayana did? Is it just does it just mean you really want to become a Buddha, or is it the cosmic force of enlightenment itself? So we're kind of dealing with this whole spectrum of the Buddhist path here when we talk about bodhicitta. It's the heart of enlightenment. So that's hopefully there at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end, right? So we're talking about the whole of Buddhism when we talk about bodhicitta. We talk about the whole of Buddhism. And, trying to kind of get to grips with, okay, what is bodhicitta? How do we make it a theme for a convention? We very quickly realized the only way we can kind of come close to this quality or to this force even is by exploring it experientially. Yeah. So this is one of the reasons why we chose to have meditations, we have discussions, we have pujas about it. Yeah. So this is one of the reasons why we do that, because you can talk endlessly about bodhicitta and still have absolutely no clue what you're talking about. I'm going to try that in the next half an hour, but but then I stop talking and that's enough, and we just get on with practicing. I find it quite poignant that we all are coming together here and practice, or try to bring to mind what bodhicitta really is. I don't know about you, but for me, those past 2 years have been the quality of the past 2 years have been one of just complete and utter weirdness. I don't know if you can relate. It's just completely weird. The past 2 years had kind of this undertone of like, what? Really? What's happening? For me, it's been especially strong. I'm not comparing, by the way. It's just it's just been quite a strong feeling for me, because I got ordained 3 years ago, and then 2.5 years ago, the pandemic happened, and now we're in a war, or maybe not we are, but we might be There's all these news coming up daily where we think, okay, when is this going to end? When is this going to stop? I've been very hit also by the assassination of the former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. Very, very hit, actually, because I studied Japanology and I encountered Buddhism in Japan. I lived in Japan as well when I encountered Buddhism. So it's just those kind of news keep coming in. Those kind of news keep coming in, and they have hit me quite strongly. So it's just this sense of heightened uncertainty about the future, the sense of heightened uncertainty, which I'm in. And it made me reflect on the way I have been or I have dealt with those kind of news and with those kind of circumstances. So I was just sort of reflecting on, okay, what did I do to meet, I don't know, lockdown, friends losing their grandparents or their parents because of a disease, all these kind of things. What have I done to face that? And I did realize that in me, at least, there was a lot of fear, a lot of panic, a lot of not wanting to sort of face it, not being sort of able to deal with it. I don't know if you had the same experience, but I sort of had two different memories of my life. One is sort of lockdown memory, and one is out of lockdown memory. So at the end of every lockdown, I forgot what I had been doing for the rest, for this whole lockdown. But then when we entered in lockdown, I entered that space again and had forgotten what I did outside of lockdown. It's this weird kind of separation of minds. And I think this is a symptom of, being in a sort of state of shock, in a state of panic almost, right? In a state of, that kind of animal instinct of just freezing. And it's also interesting to see what fear and panic does to practice. What it does to our practice, what it does to the level of engagement with our experience. So I did notice that I did try to practice more formally. In some sense, I also noticed an ongoing alienation happening. And because of that alienation, what I noticed is that my communication and my friendships sort of got more distanced as well. Vasubandhu always said we shouldn't be talking about social distance, we should have been talking about physical distance in order to keep those friendships going, right? And it's also strong to see what it does to a community. It does fear, just any type of fear and panic, does kind of seems to sort of split a community, any community. I'm not only talking about spiritual communities here, I'm talking about any kind of group of friendship. Any kind of fear, any kind of state of anxiety is something that does not bring together. It's something that separates on a deeper level. So for me, it's poignant that we're coming here together as an order, dedicating the next 4 or 5 days with bringing bodhicitta to mind, with bringing the lifeblood of Buddhism, of the Dharma to mind, and trying to bring it and create community through that. It's interesting how also fearlessness is so prominent in Buddhism, and I've always kind of thought, I didn't really think about it. I didn't really reflect on it, but you find it again and again and again. And I just want to read out a little extract from the Bodhisattva ideal. I'm sure you've all read it many times, but there's just this one little passage from Bhante where he talks about, he's just explained how puja and Shantideva's puja is a condition of bringing about the bodhicitta, and he does relate that with a sort of basic fear. So he says, in his Bodhicharyavatara, Shantideva says that the effect of giving, of puja, in short, of committing yourself to the spiritual life, is that you become without fear of being or becoming. The would-be bodhisattva has no more worries. You just give yourself to the spiritual life. You aren't bothered whether you're going to live or die, be rich or poor, be praised or blamed, or anything like that. You are just on the spiritual path, and that's that. So long as you are still wondering what to do with your life, perhaps weighing up how much time to give to spiritual things and how much to worldly things, you remain unsure, unclear, and therefore unconfident. But once you have made up your mind and committed yourself, in a sense, everything is looked after, and there's nothing to worry about. So I just find it very interesting how he almost links bodhicitta or, bodhicitta arising or being the altruistic dimension of going for refuge. So how he links commitment, deepening of going for refuge, deepening of commitment as an antidote to fear. It is one of the antidotes, isn't it? To if you feel fearful, just go for refuge more. Easier said than done, obviously. But I think this is why it's important for me to remember also Bhante saying how, he thinks it's most likely for the bodhicitta to arise within a spiritual community. So, well, yes, we all individually have to go for refuge deeper and deeper. But if we do that in a community, if you come together and go deeper, we can help each other to lose fear and anxiety of the future, to actually deepen that sense of, well, we're just on the path, and that's that. We're just here in Schlüssow doing the order convention, and that's that. I actually had that quite strongly. I noticed how coming here alleviated me of a certain sense of that tone of weirdness, or that tone of, I don't know what's going to come next week. I did notice that quite strongly coming here, that I'm much more at ease now, just being with other order members. And I think this is one of the reasons why we are coming together, and why something higher can emerge in a group of order members. So try to explore that over the next few days, experientially. So there's another little thing on fear. Does anyone know Dune, the book, the movie? I just love it. It's a very old book that was written in the year when my parents were born. It's an old classic. And in that is that litany against fear, right, by the Bene Gesserit order. And it's not a Buddhist book, obviously, but it does highlight the importance of going beyond fear and what fear does to you. So I just read that out. It's a little non-Buddhist thing. So it says, it's basically that religious order in many thousand years in the future. And they're sort of these mind-training nuns. And they created this litany against fear. And they every time they realize fear, what they do is they say this litany to themselves. And it goes like that. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Anyway, it's my little kind of nerdy moment. Because I discovered that in the lockdown, and I realized, okay, this is actually a good way of practicing if we could just do that. So keep that in mind as well. It's this facing of it, and it fits so perfectly with that sutta where the Buddha describes, well, if he experiences fear, then, he just, when he stands, he just continued standing. When he was sitting, he just continued sitting. When he, it's almost as if he just let the fear rush through him and rush over him. But anyway, this is just a little bit on how I think bodhicitta can be such a strong force against fear, uncertainty. So one of the reasons why I think practicing bodhicitta is helpful in our day and age, and why I personally have come here. Get rid of fear, great. Okay, I will now turn to the different, just very briefly line out how can we then now bring about this bodhicitta? What does Bhante say? How can we bring this out? I will be fairly brief here on each of these little things. So first of all, it's quite interesting that he goes at great length of explaining that Shantideva's puja is the condition for bringing about the bodhicitta. So practicing puja, practicing, what Shantideva lays out in the Bodhicharya Avatara is kind of the main way, devotion being the main way of bringing about bodhicitta, which is a much more kind of emotional way of relating. He even says, well, what I've just read out, it's with puja, you're not just giving offerings. You start by giving, but then you give yourself. And through giving yourself, through committing, you become without fear of becoming, which is kind of fear of existence. It's the fear of being in a conditioned world. But then he goes on to say, well, and there's Vasubandhu, and he relates how to bring about bodhicitta in a more sort of philosophical way. The first one, so what we're going to explore tomorrow, is recollection of the Buddhas. Recollection of the Buddhas. So you bring to mind, especially our Buddha, Shakyamuni, and his predecessors. So this is the tradition, Shakyamuni and his predecessors. You reflect that, they have been able to overcome samsara. Yeah, they have been able to overcome ignorance, greed, and hatred. They have been also, not free from ignorance, greed, and hatred like us, but they have managed it. They have managed to overcome this. So you recollect that, and then Bhante says, this brings about an energy, this brings about vigor, this brings about the conviction that enlightenment is possible. So this is in a way your starting point by bringing about, bringing to mind the Buddhas, those who've come before us, kind of that initial spark of faith will be, rekindled in us. It's very, very prominent also, as you all know, in, for example, the Tantric tradition, where you start every single meditation by reflecting that the Guru is on top of your head. You always bring the Guru to mind first in any kind of Tantric meditation. So this is very, very similar. I've been trying to do that quite strongly, actually, in the last few months. Just starting every single meditation by visualizing Bhante on the top of my head. Just sort of pouring out blessings, and then I kind of always go a bit back and I see all the people around him, the preceptors, and then the Buddha, and it gets a bit fuller. But this is it's for me a very strong focus point, especially since Bhante's died. It feels like I'm sort of more allowed to place him on top of my head because he doesn't sit in Herefordshire somewhere. I'm a bit literal-minded, sorry. But it's just this experience of intense blessings and intense kind of love that comes from the teacher, the transcendental, that sort of lineage pouring through. It's a great inspiration of mine recently. And through that, energy hopefully is released, vigor, the conviction that enlightenment is possible. Bhante says, faith, joy, serenity, and peace comes about by recollection of the Buddhas. Just one more thought on faith, actually. I've been looking into faith a bit, and it's just very striking if you look into faith how often it is the starting point of so many different versions of the path. So when the path is kind of described, for example, the spiral path, the positive nidanas, faith is always there in the beginning. And I think that's something worth reflecting, that faith in many different versions in the Pali Canon and other versions is always there at the start. It doesn't have to be, and what is meant is not the kind of big blazing, it's not the conviction. You don't start with a conviction, but you start with that little glimpse of, faith already starts when you think of, things can be different. Things don't have to be the way they are. Things can be different. I don't know what they're going to look like or how enlightenment is going to look like, but we just start with that openness. I sometimes find that helpful for me because I feel like, okay, well, I have to have faith now. Where is it? But just it's that little tender kind of starting point of, well, maybe something can be different. My current situation isn't the one that I have to be in. Anyway, just it was very, very striking to see how faith is, something that's kind of the bedrock next to metta, I guess, the bedrock kind of positive emotion on the path. When we think about positive emotion, we always think about metta, which is very good, but you could also ask yourself, well, is there shraddha there? Is there shraddha there? The second factor is seeing faults of conditioned existence. Seeing faults of conditioned existence. And so this is a bit more reflective. This is you turn a bit more inwards. You start to reflect upon conditioned existence in itself. And the faults, obviously, they are kind of the three lakshanas, especially impermanence. You turn especially towards impermanence, out of which dukkha and insubstantiality sort of arise and emerge. Bhante says, in a way, insubstantiality is a sort of subtler fault. Right, it's still a fault. It's like you still want to see some sort of substance or some sort of thing there, but it's not just impermanent. It's not just unsatisfactory. It's also not a thing. So it's a kind of subtler version of that. So you can kind of progress from impermanence to dukkha to insubstantiality in your reflections when you're trying to see the faults of conditioned existence, and then Bhante says, you end with, well, the realization that nothing can satisfy your deepest longings. Thus, what arises is a sense of detachment. So detachment comes out of that, seeing the faults of conditioned existence. And then the third quality, the third conditions, is observing the sufferings of sentient beings. So we've just now sort of looked within. We've sort of looked within our experience, and we've seen that, conditioned existence is impermanent. It's because of that it is unsatisfactory. Because of that it's not a thing. We then sort of turn outwards and see, well, there's just so much suffering in the world. You're getting a strong glimpse of suffering. Bhante is very good at enlisting all the different types of sufferings, war, famine, political unrest, natural suffering, animal suffering. All these different types of sufferings are all around us. Human existence itself is suffering. Our own mental states are suffering, even when they're positive sometimes. And then he says, if you kind of face that, if you're able to sort of face that suffering, the fear that comes with that, then bodhicitta can arise or starts arising. He quotes a poet and calls, kind of equates that kind of compassion, that kind of will towards enlightenment as painless sympathy with pain. So it's a painless sympathy with pain. It's not we all know that. It's not a kind of identification with pain, right? It's that kind of, but it's good to keep that in mind, to be able to face everything that's around us, everything that's going not great, with that kind of, without being kind of overly involved in it emotionally. And I think if we do that, we realize that in a way everyone is suffering, all is suffering. There's kind of no victim, no perpetrator. Even they are suffering to a degree. There's only sufferers, so to speak. Yeah, I think this is one of the degrees of insights that comes with observing the sufferings of sentient beings. You just realize there's only sufferers, so to speak. There's no kind of perpetrators. There's no victims. Ultimately speaking, obviously, there's only suffering beings, and that kind of, it's almost a sort of shunyata aspect to it, and out of that will the bodhicitta arise, out of that realization. And then we all know that point of Bhante where he says, well, out of those two trends, out of the inward facing trend, and the seeing faults of conditioned existence, and the detachment, and the sort of more compassionate involvement, observing the sufferings. He calls it that kind of what was it? The bitangential tendency of being. It's that kind of that tension that arises of wanting to withdraw, but also seeing the suffering and wanting to help. That is what the bodhisattva is made up of, isn't it? Again, we all know that. But this is kind of this is that famous quote where our explosion comes from. It's when that tension has become so strong that you've sort of. He says you have to go and go to the end with both these tendencies. You have got to develop those two tendencies at the same time. Again, that's just the bodhisattva ideal. But there, then theoretically, you can sort of come to the end, and you have to just transcend that tension. That's the explosion of the heart. The heart here being obviously the bodhicitta, the transformed bodhicitta. And then towards the end, the fourth quality is contemplating the virtues of the Tathagatas. So this is Bhante describes it almost as an assimilation with the Tathagatas. So there's a sort of arc between these four qualities, right? So we've started out with just bringing the ideal to mind. Then we've engaged thoroughly with ourselves, with wisdom, with the world, with compassion. Now we've luckily transcended it and exploded, and now we sort of assimilate with the Tathagatas. We assimilate with the Buddhas. We visualize them. We can do that through visualization, through sadhana, through puja, coming back to puja. And this sort of helps to, become one with the Tathagatas. This is kind of the end of the goal then. This is kind of then bodhicitta in its fullest, where, our heart hasn't just a little bit of bodhicitta in it. Our heart literally is the bodhicitta. And we are firmly keeping a transcendental outlook in mind. So he says those are the four things: recollection of the Buddhas, seeing faults of conditioned existence, observing the sufferings of sentient beings, and contemplating the virtue of the Tathagatas. And those in turn bring about energy and vigor, detachment, compassion, and becoming one, assimilation with the Tathagatas. And those four, in some way, will bring about the bodhicitta, ideally in a community like this. That'll be that.